There is no greater pain than watching your child die while you stand by helpless. For Isaiah Roland, in the winter of 1873, the worst nightmare of every parent had become his reality. His son Nathan lay with a raging fever in their mountain cabin, and every doctor had already lost hope. Isaiah had tried everything. He had traveled hundreds of miles in search of healers, spent his last dollar on remedies, and prayed to a God he wasn't sure could still hear him. Outside the cabin walls, the snow falls, thick and heavy. His son's breath grows weaker with every passing hour. Then, a knock at the door. Standing there is a small girl, no more than 7 years old, sent by the townsfolk who whisper that she has a special gift. Isaiah has nothing left to lose. He lets her in. She kneels beside Nathan's bed, places her small hand on his chest, and begins to whisper. What happens next defies everything he thought was possible. But who is this mysterious child? And what is the price of her extraordinary gift? Before we return to the story, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed, because I have something very special in store for you tomorrow. The threadbare quilt covering Nathan's feverish body had seen better days. Like everything else in Isaiah Roland's life, it was a relic of a happier time. Hand-stitched by his late wife, Sarah, its faded blue and white pattern now served as a silent witness to his despair. Every thread held memories of fireside talks, of Sarah's gentle hands working as she hummed old hymns. Now, it was all that stood between his dying son and the cold mountain air seeping through the cabin's timber walls. Isaiah sat in the rough-hewn chair he'd built with his own hands 3 winters ago, watching Nathan's chest rise and fall in a labored rhythm. The boy's face, normally bright with a 7-year-old's curiosity, had taken on a waxy pallor that Isaiah recognized from many a battlefield. He had seen that look before, the slow surrender that comes when the body begins to let go of life. The tarnished military medal, tucked away in the wooden box beneath his bed, seemed to mock him now. Colonel Isaiah Roland, decorated veteran of Bull Run and Gettysburg, a man who had led charges against Confederate lines without flinching, was powerless against an enemy he could neither see nor fight. All his tactical genius, all his courage under fire, meant nothing against the fever consuming his son. He had tried everything a father could. 3 months ago, when Nathan first fell ill, Isaiah had saddled his horse and ridden the 40 miles to Clearwater, the nearest settlement worthy of the name. Dr. Harrison, a capable man who had served as a field surgeon during the war, examined the boy thoroughly. His diagnosis was grim but honest: a fever of unknown origin, unresponsive to standard remedies. "I've seen it before," the doctor had said, his calloused hands gently touching Nathan's burning forehead. "Sometimes, children just take on these strange illnesses. The body is fighting something we can't name. All we can do is keep him comfortable and pray his constitution sees him through." But prayers felt hollow to a man who had buried his wife just 3 years before. Sarah had succumbed to a similar fever, one that had appeared from nowhere and swept through her like a wildfire. Isaiah had watched helplessly then too, holding her hand as she faded away, his desperate promises of better doctors, better medicines, a better everything, all in vain. After Sarah's death, Isaiah had retreated to his mountain homestead with Nathan, seeking solace in the wilderness that had always been his refuge. He built the cabin himself, in a valley where the pines grew thick and the nearest neighbor was Chester McMurphy, a grizzled old trapper who lived 5 miles down the mountain. It was a place where a man could think, where the weight of civilization didn't press down on his shoulders like a heavy pack. Isaiah had served his country with distinction, earning accolades that now gathered dust in that wooden box. The citation for his Medal of Honor spoke of extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy fire, but it said nothing of the nightmares that followed, or the weight of sending young men to their deaths. When the war ended, he wanted nothing more than to disappear into the mountains with Sarah and build a life far from the reach of politics and violence. For a few blessed years, that dream had seemed possible. Sarah took to mountain life with the grace that defined everything she did. She learned to preserve meat for the long winters, to identify the medicinal plants that grew wild in the high meadows, to find beauty in the stark landscape that stretched endlessly beyond their cabin door. Nathan was born here, delivered by Sarah herself with only Isaiah's steady hands to help. The boy thrived in the clean mountain air, growing strong and curious about every creature and plant in their remote domain. But paradise proved fragile. Sarah's illness came without warning, a fever that began as nothing more than fatigue after a day spent picking wild berries. Within a week, she was delirious. Within 2, she was gone. Isaiah had ridden frantically to town for help, but by the time he returned with Dr. Harrison, Sarah's body was already growing cold beneath the same quilt that now covered their son. The irony was not lost on him. He had survived countless battles where death rained down like hail. He had seen friends torn apart by shrapnel and bayonets. He had walked through fields blanketed with the bodies of boys barely old enough to shave. Yet he could not protect the 2 people who mattered most to him from an invisible enemy that struck without warning or mercy. Nathan stirred beneath the quilt, muttering senseless words. Isaiah leaned forward, pressing a cool cloth to the boy's brow. The fever had been climbing for days, despite every remedy Isaiah could concoct. He'd tried willow bark tea for the pain, cold compresses to bring the temperature down, even some of the native remedies Sarah had learned from trading with the Crow women who occasionally passed through their valley. Nothing worked. Each day, Nathan seemed to fade a little more, his bright eyes growing distant and unfocused. He barely ate, and when he did manage to swallow a little broth, it often came back up within the hour. Isaiah had considered another trip to town, but the snow had been falling without pause for 3 days, and the mountain passes were becoming treacherous. Even if he could get through, what could Dr. Harrison do that he hadn't already tried? The cabin seemed to shrink with each passing hour, the log walls feeling as if they were closing in like the sides of a coffin. He had built it as a sanctuary, but it now felt like a prison, where he was forced to watch his son slip away. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and the fire in the stone hearth crackled and hissed, as if commenting on the futility of man's struggle against fate. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, a sound like distant voices calling the lost home. Isaiah had always found comfort in that sound, but tonight it felt ominous, as if the mountain itself were preparing to claim another soul. The snow continued to fall, thick, heavy flakes that muffled all sound save for the fire's crackle and Nathan's ragged breathing. Isaiah thought of the letter he had started to his sister in Ohio, the one that would tell her Nathan was gone. He had torn it up twice, unable to find words that could capture the magnitude of losing everything that mattered. How could you explain to someone who had never known such loss that the world simply ceases to make sense? That a man can feel his heart beating in his chest while feeling utterly dead inside? The wooden box under his bed held more than his military medal. There were letters from Sarah, written during a brief period when he'd been called away for survey work for the territorial government. There was a pressed flower from their wedding bouquet, Nathan's first tooth, and a sketch Sarah had made of their valley in the autumn, when the aspens turned to gold against the dark green of the pines. All of it would be meaningless without Nathan. The cabin would become nothing but a tomb filled with memories too painful to bear. Isaiah had already begun to think of what he would do if the worst happened. He couldn't stay here, among the ghosts of his former happiness. Perhaps he would head further west, into the territories where a man could lose himself completely in the vastness of an untamed land. But these dark thoughts were cut short by something he didn't expect. The crunch of footsteps in the snow outside. Isaiah's hand moved instinctively to the rifle hanging above the mantelpiece. Old habits from the war and the wilderness died hard, and he was wary of unexpected visitors. Who would be traveling in this weather, so far from any established trail? The footsteps stopped at his door, followed by 3 soft knocks that somehow felt more patient than urgent. Isaiah rose from his chair, moving quietly so as not to disturb Nathan. He approached the heavy plank door he'd fitted with iron hinges scavenged from an abandoned mine. "Who's there?" he called out through the thick wood. A small voice answered, barely audible over the wind. "Please, sir. The folks in town sent me. They said you might be in need of help." Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. A child. Out here. In this storm? He quickly lifted the heavy wooden bar securing the door and pulled it open, letting in a swirl of snow and frigid air. On the doorstep stood a little girl, no more than 7 years old, bundled in a coat that had seen better days. Her dark hair was caked with snow, and her brown eyes held an unnatural calm that seemed at odds with the circumstances. She was carrying a small bundle in her arms, and she looked up at him with an expression of patient expectation. "What are you doing out here, child?" Isaiah asked, stepping aside to let her into the warmth of the cabin. "Where are your people?" The girl stepped inside and stamped the snow from her worn boots. "I'm Anna," she said simply. "The townsfolk. They said your son is sick. They said maybe I could help." Isaiah stared at her, bewildered. Chester must have made it to town despite the weather and told them of Nathan's condition. But why would they send a child? And how had she managed the mountain trail in these conditions? "Anna, is it?" Isaiah said, closing the door against the wind. "Well, Anna, I appreciate the thought, but I don't see how." He trailed off as the girl walked toward Nathan's bedside with a purpose that seemed strangely confident for one so young. She set down her bundle and knelt beside the rough wooden frame, her small hand hovering over Nathan's feverish forehead. "He is very sick," she said, her matter-of-fact tone sending a shiver down Isaiah's spine. "But he doesn't have to be." Isaiah watched in stunned silence as the small girl knelt beside his dying son, her movements deliberate and practiced in a way that defied her apparent age. Anna reached into the bundle she had carried and withdrew a small leather pouch, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. In the flickering lamplight, the object seemed to radiate an otherworldly presence, adorned with symbols that were neither Christian nor anything familiar to Isaiah's well-traveled eyes. "Child, what do you think you're doing?" Isaiah asked, his voice laced with the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders. Despite his desperation, every instinct told him to be cautious. He had seen too much of the world to trust easily, especially where his son's well-being was concerned. Anna looked up at him, her unsettling brown eyes seeming to hold a depth far beyond her years. "I'm going to help Nathan," she said simply. as if stating an obvious fact. The fever is not natural. It is something born of sorrow that has seeped deep into the bone. The words struck Isaiah like a physical blow. How could this child know of the grief that had consumed his family since Sarah's passing? He had told no one in town the details of his wife's death, keeping his pain hidden behind the stoic facade he had perfected during his years in the army. "You don't know what you're talking about," Isaiah said, but his voice lacked conviction. Something about Anna's presence had already begun to shift the atmosphere in the cabin. The oppressive weight of impending loss seemed to have lessened, just slightly, as if her very presence carried hope as a tangible force. Anna opened the leather pouch and began to remove small items, dried herbs that filled the air with an earthy, almost mystical aroma. Smooth stones that seemed to absorb and reflect the lamplight in impossible ways, and what looked like a braided cord made of materials Isaiah couldn't identify. Each artifact seemed to pulse with a meaning that transcended its physical appearance. "Nathan's body is fighting something that does not belong to the world of the living," Anna continued, her small hands arranging the items in a precise pattern around the boy's bed. "Sometimes, when people carry too much sorrow, it carves out a space where sickness can take root and grow. The fever is just trying to burn away something that doesn't belong." Isaiah felt his skepticism war with a desperate hope he'd almost forgotten how to feel. He'd been raised in a practical family, where problems had practical solutions, where faith was something practiced on Sundays but never relied upon for daily survival. His military experience had only hammered this worldview into place. Battles were won with strategy and firepower, not with prayers and wishful thinking. Yet here was this child, speaking with a certainty that seemed to spring from a source far beyond her few years on earth. The way she moved beside Nathan's bed suggested a familiarity with illness and healing that no 7-year-old should possess. Her calm demeanor in the face of what should have been a terrifying situation spoke of experiences no ordinary child had ever known. "Where did you learn these things?" Isaiah asked, leaning back in his chair, but keeping his eyes fixed on Anna's every move. "Who taught you about healing?" Anna paused her preparations and met his gaze with an expression that seemed equal parts compassion and ancient wisdom. "The elders taught me," she said. "The ones who remember how the world worked before people forgot how to listen to what the earth and the sky were trying to tell them." She placed her small hands on Nathan's burning forehead, and immediately, the boy's restless movements began to still. His ragged breathing seemed to ease, and for the first time in days, his face relaxed, settling into something approaching a peaceful sleep. "What you're seeing isn't just a fever," Anna continued, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality that reminded Isaiah of the chants he'd sometimes heard from Native American guides during his research expeditions. "It's grief trying to pull Nathan to wherever his mother has gone. He can feel your sadness, and a part of him thinks that maybe he should follow her, so you won't have to hurt so much." The words struck Isaiah like a flash of lightning across a dark landscape. He had been so focused on Nathan's physical symptoms that he'd never considered the emotional currents that might be tearing at his son. The boy truly had been different since Sarah's death, quieter, more withdrawn, as if carrying a burden far too heavy for his small shoulders. "That's impossible," Isaiah whispered. But even as he said the words, he felt their falsehood. Nathan had always been sensitive to the moods of those around him, picking up on tensions and emotions the adults thought they had hidden. If Isaiah's own grief was as overwhelming as he suspected, perhaps it really had created an environment where his son couldn't properly heal. Anna began to hum softly, a melody that seemed to drift from somewhere beyond the confines of their small cabin. It was unlike anything Isaiah had ever heard. Not quite a hymn, not quite a folk song, but something that seemed to bridge the gap between the sacred and the earthly. As she hummed, she shifted the stones from her pouch into new positions, creating patterns that caught and reflected the lamplight in mesmerizing ways. Nathan's breathing continued to steady, each inhalation seeming deeper and more natural than the ragged gasps that had plagued him for days. Color began to return to his cheeks, replacing the waxy pallor that had marked him as someone with one foot already in the grave. "How is this possible?" Isaiah asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything he thought he knew about medicine and healing was being challenged by what he was witnessing. This wasn't the gradual improvement that might come from proper care and nursing. This was a transformation happening before his very eyes, in real time. "Healing isn't just about the body," Anna replied, her hands moving in gentle circles over Nathan's chest. "Sometimes, the spirit gets tangled in things that don't belong to it." The fever was trying to burn away those tangles, but Nathan is too young to do that work alone. He needed someone to help him remember that he belongs here, with you, not chasing shadows in the dark. As if in response to her words, Nathan's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 2 days. They were clear and focused, no longer clouded by delirium. He looked at Anna with curiosity rather than fear, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, his voice weak but coherent. "I'm Anna," she answered with a gentle smile. "I came to help you remember something important." "What's that?" "That your father needs you to stay here with him. He's been carrying so much sadness. He's forgotten how to be happy. And you're the only one who can remind him." Nathan turned his head to look at Isaiah, and for the first time since Sarah's death, the boy's eyes held something that looked like hope. "Dad, I feel better. The burning is gone." Isaiah pushed himself out of his chair and moved to the bedside, laying a hand on Nathan's forehead. The fever had indeed broken. His son's skin was cool and normal for the first time in over a week. It was a miracle in the truest sense of the word, something that defied every natural law Isaiah thought he understood. "Anna," Isaiah said, his voice thick with an emotion he had been suppressing for far too long. "I don't know what you did, or how you did it, but—" "The healing isn't finished," Anna interrupted, beginning to gather her stones and herbs back into her leather pouch. "Nathan's body is well, but there is still work to do. The sorrow that made him sick is still here, in this house. Until it is cleansed, the sickness can return." A chill ran down Isaiah's spine that had nothing to do with the cold wind outside. "What do you mean?" Anna stood and looked directly at him, her brown eyes holding a depth that seemed far older than her small face. "You have been carrying your grief like a poison, and it has been seeping into everything around you. Nathan became ill because he was trying to absorb some of that poison for you, but his little body couldn't handle it." The truth of her words hit Isaiah with devastating clarity. He thought of the months since Sarah's death, of the way he had closed himself off, of the heavy silences that filled their cabin. He had believed he was protecting Nathan by not burdening him with adult grief, but perhaps his withdrawal had created its own kind of burden. "What do you want from me?" Isaiah asked, though a part of him already knew the answer. "I want you to let me help you, the same way I helped Nathan," Anna replied. "But first, I need to stay here for a while. The people in town said I could, and I have nowhere else to go. Isaiah looked at this mysterious child who had just performed what could only be called a miracle. Then he looked at his son, who was now sitting up in bed for the first time in days. Whatever Anna was, wherever she had come from, she had given him back the most precious thing in his world. "You can stay as long as you need," he said finally. "But I want to understand what just happened here." Anna smiled, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked like the 7-year-old child she appeared to be. "Understanding will come," she said. "But first, Nathan needs some real food. I think there's soup to be made." 3 days had passed since Anna's miraculous healing of Nathan, and Isaiah found himself walking through a world that no longer followed the rules he had spent a lifetime learning. His son moved about the cabin with renewed vigor. His appetite had returned with a startling intensity, and the color in his cheeks had bloomed like roses against the spring snow. Yet every blessing was wrapped in a mystery that only deepened with each passing hour. Anna had settled into their home with an ease that should have been comforting, but instead filled Isaiah with a quiet disquiet. She knew where Sarah had kept the good dishes without being told. She understood the temperamental way the cast iron stove needed to be fed to maintain an even heat, and she moved through the house as if she had lived there for years instead of days. Most unsettling of all was how she had found Sarah's handwritten recipe book on the second morning of her stay. The worn leather volume had been tucked away at the back of the small pantry, behind jars of pickled vegetables and sacks of flour. Isaiah hadn't looked at it since Sarah's death, unable to bear seeing his wife's careful script documenting the meals that had filled their home with warmth and love. Yet Anna had retrieved it without hesitation, opening it to a page detailing Sarah's special remedy for winter coughs, a concoction of honey, ginger, and herbs that Nathan had always loved. "How did you know where to find that?" Isaiah had asked, watching as Anna measured the ingredients with the practiced precision of someone who had made the recipe countless times before. "Your wife showed me," Anna had replied matter-of-factly, as if this were a satisfactory explanation for any reasonable person. The casual mention of Sarah sent a chill through Isaiah. "What do you mean, she showed you? Sarah's been gone for 3 years." Anna looked up from her work, her brown eyes holding that unsettling depth that made Isaiah feel she could see straight into his soul. "She isn't gone in the way you think. Sometimes people who love deeply leave echoes of themselves in the places they were happiest. This cabin is full of her echoes." Isaiah wanted to dismiss the child's words as the imaginative ramblings of someone too young to understand the finality of death. But watching Anna at work in the kitchen, moving with the same graceful efficiency that had characterized Sarah's cooking, made it impossible to hold on to his skepticism. She even hummed the same wordless tune that Sarah had been fond of humming while preparing meals. Nathan seemed completely at ease with Anna's presence, accepting her knowledge and skills with the easy adaptability of childhood. He helped her in the kitchen, learning techniques for baking bread and preserving food that Isaiah had never bothered to master. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by Nathan's delighted laughter as Anna told him stories about animals she claimed to know in places that sounded more like folklore than geography. "She says the crows on Eagle Peak understand 3 different languages," Nathan told his father after spending a morning exploring the area around the cabin with Anna. "And that the old grizzly bear who sleeps in Morrison's cave used to be friends with the miners before they all left." Isaiah listened to these fantastic tales with a growing sense of concern. He had always encouraged Nathan's imagination, but there was something different about the stories Anna told. They carried the weight of believed truth rather than acknowledged fiction. More troubling still was the way Nathan seemed to accept every impossible detail without question. The fourth morning brought an unexpected visitor who would complicate Isaiah's already fragile understanding of recent events. Chester McMurray appeared at their door just after dawn, his face weathered and his expression that of a man who had witnessed something that challenged his fundamental beliefs about the world. "Isaiah," the old mountain man said without preamble, "we need to talk about that girl you've taken in." Isaiah invited Chester inside, grateful for a chance to discuss his concerns with someone whose judgment he trusted. The two men had developed a friendship based on a mutual respect for solitude and an understanding of wilderness survival. Chester had been the closest thing to a neighbor during Sarah's final days, offering practical help without intrusive questions or unwanted sympathy. "She healed Nathan," Isaiah said simply, settling his friend at their rustic wooden table while Anna and Nathan were outside gathering eggs from their small flock of chickens. "I saw it with my own eyes. The boy was dying, and she brought him back." Chester nodded slowly, his fingers working the brim of the hat he held in his hands. "I heard as much in town. News travels fast when something like that happens. But Isaiah, there are things about this child that don't fit the natural order." "What kind of things?" "Well, for a start, nobody in Clearwater remembers sending her up here. Doc Harrison swears he never suggested it, and the pastor's wife says she's never seen the girl before in her life. When I started asking around about that wagon train she supposedly came off of, people started looking at me like I'd gone mad." Isaiah felt his stomach tighten. He had been so consumed by Nathan's recovery that he hadn't thought to verify Anna's story of how she'd arrived on their doorstep. In his desperate gratitude, he had simply accepted her explanation without question. "There's more," Chester continued, lowering his voice, though Anna and Nathan were still outside. "I've been hunting these mountains for nigh on 20 years. I know every trail, every pass, every place a wagon could get through. There hasn't been a train come through these parts in over a month, and certainly not one that got caught in bad weather." The implications of Chester's words settled over Isaiah like a heavy blanket. If Anna hadn't come from a wagon train, if the townspeople hadn't sent her, then where had she come from? And how had she found his isolated cabin in the middle of a blizzard? "Maybe she's a runaway," Isaiah suggested, though he didn't really believe it. Anna displayed none of the fear or anxiety he would expect from a child fleeing dangerous circumstances. Her calm confidence seemed unshakable, as if she existed in a state of certainty about her place in the world that few adults ever achieved. "Perhaps," Chester agreed, but his tone suggested he found that explanation as unsatisfying as Isaiah did. "Or maybe she's something else entirely. I've heard stories from the tribesmen about children who aren't what they seem, spirit guides who take human form to help people through hard times." The suggestion hung in the air between them, like smoke from a dying fire. Isaiah wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but he had seen too much in recent days to dismiss anything as impossible. Anna had healed his son through methods that defied medical understanding. She demonstrated knowledge she shouldn't possess, and moved through their home as if guided by invisible hands. "You think she's some kind of supernatural being?" Isaiah asked, surprised at how seriously he was entertaining the possibility. "I think she's something that doesn't fit into the world, as most of us understand it," Chester replied. "The question is, what does she want? Spirits don't usually meddle in human affairs without a good reason." Before Isaiah could answer, the cabin door swung open, and Anna entered, with Nathan close behind her. Both carried baskets full of fresh eggs, and Nathan was chattering excitedly about a hawk he'd seen circling high above them. Anna says the hawk was carrying a message from somewhere far away, Nathan announced. She could tell by the way it was circling instead of hunting. Anna set her basket down and looked directly at Chester. Her brown eyes held a recognition that seemed to startle the old mountain man. "You're worried about me," she said, with the direct honesty that characterized all her speech. "You think I'm dangerous." Chester studied her face for a long moment before answering. "I think you're powerful, child. And in my experience, powerful things can be dangerous, even when they don't mean to be." Anna nodded, as if this were a reasonable concern. "Power can be dangerous," she agreed. "But so can the things power is meant to fix. Sometimes the risk of helping is less than the risk of doing nothing." She moved to the stove and began preparing what looked like Sarah's special pancakes. The ones she would make on Sunday mornings when they had extra eggs and time to linger over breakfast. Watching Anna work, Isaiah was struck again by the uncanny familiarity of her movements, as if she had inherited someone else's muscle memory. "I will not harm Isaiah or Nathan," Anna continued, a solemnity in her voice that seemed to echo with an unseen authority. "I came here to help heal what is broken, but sometimes healing requires facing things people would rather leave buried." The following week brought changes that Isaiah could not explain, but also could not deny. Anna's presence seemed to breathe life into everything on their homestead, from the ailing cow that had been producing thin milk to the garden that struggled in the poor mountain soil. Most remarkable of all was his father's broken compass, an artifact that had sat uselessly on the mantelpiece for more than a decade. Isaiah had inherited the brass instrument from his father, who had used it during his service in the war with Mexico. The compass had guided the Rollins family on countless journeys, but it had stopped working shortly after Isaiah returned from the Civil War, its needle spinning aimlessly, as if searching for a magnetic north that no longer existed. He had kept it anyway, unable to throw away something that connected him to 3 generations of military service. On the morning of Anna's 8th day with them, Isaiah noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. The compass needle was pointing steadily north. Its brass surface gleamed as if it had been recently polished. He picked up the instrument with trembling hands, watching the needle hold its true bearing as he turned the compass in different directions. "It started working again yesterday," Nathan said from behind him. "Anna touched it when she was dusting, and it just started pointing the right way again." Isaiah turned to see his son watching him with the calm acceptance that had become Nathan's default response to the impossible things happening around Anna. The boy had adapted to their guest's presence with remarkable ease, treating her uncanny abilities as just another aspect of everyday life, like the fact that some people were good at math or music. "Did she say anything about how she fixed it?" Isaiah asked, studying the compass face, which now showed clear directional markings where before there had been only a blur. "She said some things just need to be reminded of what they're supposed to do," Nathan replied. "She talks to things sometimes, you know? Not like people talk, but like she's reminding them of something they forgot." That revelation should have alarmed Isaiah, but he was beginning to accept that the normal rules no longer seemed to apply to his home. Anna's ability to communicate with animals had become evident during her first week. She could calm their skittish horse with a few soft words, coax the hens into laying even in the dead of winter, and had somehow negotiated a truce with the family of raccoons that raided their grain stores. Chester's warnings about Anna's mysterious origins had planted seeds of doubt that Isaiah couldn't ignore. but those concerns were balanced by the undeniable improvements in their daily lives. Nathan was healthier than he had been since Sarah's death. Their small farm was more productive than ever, and Isaiah found himself sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The most unsettling change, however, the one that gnawed at him, was the return of his dreams of Sarah. For 3 years, Isaiah's sleep had been either dreamless or filled with the grim memories of war and loss. But since Anna's arrival, he had begun to have vivid dreams in which Sarah appeared as clearly as if she were still alive. They weren't the confusing, symbolic dreams that grief sometimes produces, but coherent conversations in which Sarah spoke to him with the same gentle wisdom she'd possessed in life. In these dreams, Sarah seemed to know about Anna, referring to the girl as if her presence were expected and welcome. She spoke of unfinished business and the importance of letting go of guilt, which served no purpose but to keep wounds from scarring over. Most unnerving of all, the dream Sarah seemed to know things about Isaiah's current state of mind, things she could not possibly have learned before her death. "She's not what she seems," Chester had warned on his most recent visit. "I've been asking around, talking to some of the tribal elders I know from my trapping days. They tell stories of spirit children who appear in times of great need, but they always warn that such help comes at a price." The old mountain man shared local legends about supernatural beings that could take human form, compassionate creatures that sometimes intervened in mortal affairs when the balance between life and death was threatened. According to these stories, such beings possessed great power to heal and aid, but their very presence indicated that something fundamental needed to be righted in the natural order. "What kind of price?" Isaiah had asked, though a part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "That depends on what needs fixing," Chester had replied. "Sometimes, it's as simple as learning to accept help from others. Sometimes, you have to let go of something precious to make things right." Anna seemed aware of the conversations that swirled around her, but she never directly addressed the questions about her origins or abilities. Instead, she continued her work of quiet transformation, healing not only living creatures, but somehow restoring the sense of life and purpose that had vanished from their homestead after Sarah's death. She taught Nathan skills no 7-year-old should have mastered: how to read the weather by watching cloud formations, how to identify medicinal plants by their subtle differences, how to understand the mood of wild animals by observing their behavior. Even more remarkably, Nathan seemed to absorb these lessons instantly, as if Anna were awakening a knowledge that had always existed within him rather than teaching entirely new concepts. "Your son has a gift," Anna told Isaiah one evening, as they watched Nathan demonstrate an uncanny ability to predict which way the deer would travel through the valley. "He can feel the connections between living things. It's something he inherited from his mother." It was the first time Anna had mentioned Sarah directly, and Isaiah felt the breath catch in his throat. "What do you mean, he inherited it from her?" "Sarah could feel the pain of others," Anna explained, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used when discussing difficult truths. "It's why she was such a good healer, why people brought their sick children to her, even though she had no formal training. She could feel what was wrong before the symptoms became visible." Isaiah remembered the incredible accuracy of Sarah's folk remedies, the way she seemed to know when someone in town was suffering, even before news reached their isolated cabin. He had chalked it up to intuition and experience, but perhaps it had been something more fundamental. "Nathan has that same ability," Anna continued, "but it's been dormant since his mother died, because he's been trying to protect himself from feeling too much pain. The fever wasn't just a sickness. It was his gift trying to awaken, while his conscious mind tried to keep it buried. The explanation made a terrible kind of sense. Nathan had always been sensitive to the emotions of those around him, picking up on tensions and moods that the adults thought they had hidden. If he had inherited some uncanny sensitivity from Sarah, the overwhelming grief that had settled over their home after her death might very well have made him physically ill. "Is that why you came?" Isaiah asked. "To help Nathan understand his abilities?" Anna was silent for a long moment, her brown eyes focused on some distant point beyond the cabin walls. "I came because you were all in danger," she said finally. The grief was so strong it was attracting things that shouldn't be drawn here. Nathan was beginning to answer that call. The words sent a chill through Isaiah that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. "What kind of things?" "The kind that live in the spaces between life and death," Anna answered. "The kind that feed on sorrow and try to convince the living that death would be easier than healing." The revelation came on a gray morning when the mountain fog hung low over the valley like the breath of sleeping giants. Anna had been with them for 2 weeks, and Isaiah was beginning to believe he might understand the strange equilibrium they had reached. Then she led him to a place he was sure he would never find again, to retrieve something he had given up as lost forever. Sarah's wedding ring had disappeared during her final illness, slipping from her finger as the fever consumed her body and left her hands thin and frail. Isaiah had searched frantically for the simple gold band in the days after her death, turning over every piece of furniture, examining every inch of the cabin floor, even sifting through the ashes of the fires they had kept burning during her sickness. The ring was simply gone, as if it had never been. "She wants you to have it back," Anna said simply, standing at the door in her worn coat, looking at Isaiah with those unsettling brown eyes that seemed to hold knowledge from sources he couldn't begin to identify. "What are you talking about?" Isaiah asked, though his heart had already begun to pound with a hope he had buried along with his wife. "Sarah's ring," Anna replied. "She's been trying to show you where it is, but you weren't ready to see. This morning, you are." Isaiah wanted to dismiss the child's words as fantasy, but he had witnessed too many impossible things to doubt her again. Against his better judgment, he found himself following Anna out of the cabin and into the misty morning air. Nathan trailed behind them, his small feet crunching on the frosted grass, with the eager curiosity that had returned along with his health. Anna led them away from the cabin, past the small garden where Sarah had grown herbs for her healing remedies, beyond the creek where they drew water for washing and cooking. She moved with the determined stride of someone following a familiar path, though Isaiah was certain they were traveling through terrain he had never explored, despite living here for more than 5 years. They climbed through pine and aspen, following what might have been an animal trail, or nothing more than Anna's unexplainable sense of direction. The fog seemed to part before them like a curtain, revealing glimpses of the valley below and the peaks that surrounded their isolated homestead. After nearly an hour of walking, Anna stopped beside a massive boulder that had fallen from the cliff face sometime in the distant past. Moss and lichen covered its weathered surface, and small wildflowers grew in the crevices where soil had collected over countless seasons. To Isaiah, it looked like one of 1,000 other rocks scattered across the mountain wilderness. "Here," Anna said, kneeling beside the boulder and pressing her small hands against a patch of moss-covered stone. She dropped it here when she came to gather the special mint that only grows in this spot. She was already sick, but she wanted to make a tea that would help her feel better. Isaiah stared at the ordinary rock, his mind struggling to process Anna's words. He had no memory of Sarah ever mentioning this place, nor of her gathering mint anywhere but the small patch that grew beside their cabin. Yet, something about the spot felt familiar, like a scene from a dream he couldn't quite recall. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've explored every inch of this mountain. Sarah never wandered this far from the cabin, especially not when she was sick." Anna looked at him with boundless patience, her small hands still pressed against the moss-covered stone. "She came here the day before she took to her bed. She was trying to find something that might cure her, before the fever grew too strong. The ring slipped from her finger as she knelt to pick the mint, and it rolled into a crack in the rock." Without waiting for permission, Anna began to clear away the moss and accumulated debris from a deep fissure at the base of the boulder. Her movements were precise and certain, as if she had done this many times before. Isaiah watched in a stunned silence as she slid her hand into the narrow opening and retrieved something that glinted in the filtered morning light. Sarah's wedding band lay in Anna's small palm. Its simple gold surface was dulled from 3 years of exposure to the elements, but it was unmistakably the same ring Isaiah had placed on his wife's finger during their wedding ceremony. The sight of it hit him like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories from that joyful day when the future had seemed to hold nothing but promise. "How did you know?" Isaiah whispered, his voice thick with emotions he had kept locked away since Sarah's death. "How could you possibly know where to look?" Anna handed him the ring, with the reverent care of someone returning a sacred object to its rightful place. "She's been trying to tell you for 3 years," she said softly. "Every time you walked in the woods, every time you sat by her grave, she was here, calling to you. But you couldn't hear her, because the guilt was too loud." The words struck Isaiah with devastating accuracy. He had carried his guilt like a slow-acting poison since Sarah's death, blaming himself for not finding better doctors, for not trying stronger remedies, for not being able to save the woman who was the center of his world. That guilt had become such a part of him that he had forgotten what life felt like without its constant weight. "She doesn't blame you," Anna continued, her young voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from far beyond her apparent age. "She never blamed you. The sickness that took her was something that couldn't be fought with medicine or willpower. It was her time to leave, and she knew it." Isaiah knelt beside the rock, clutching Sarah's ring so tightly that its edges dug into his palm. For the first time since she had died, he allowed himself to truly feel the magnitude of his loss, without the protective barrier of guilt and self-recrimination. The pain was overwhelming, but it was a clean pain, the honest grief of a man who had loved deeply, rather than the toxic self-torture he had been inflicting upon himself. "I should have saved her," he whispered, the words torn from some deep place where he hid his most fundamental failure. "I should have done more. Found better help, tried harder." "You did everything a loving husband could do," Anna interrupted, placing her small hand on his shoulder, its warmth surprising. "Sarah knows that. She has watched you punish yourself, and it breaks her heart. She cannot find peace while you are drowning in a guilt you don't deserve to carry." Nathan had remained silent throughout this exchange, but now he approached his father with the instinctual compassion that children sometimes possess. "Papa," he said softly, "Anna's right. Mama wouldn't want you to hurt so much." Isaiah looked up at his son through tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 3 years. Nathan's face held the same gentle wisdom that had so often characterized Sarah's expression when she was comforting someone in pain. It was as if a part of her spirit lived on in their son, waiting for Isaiah to heal enough to recognize it. She visits me sometimes, in dreams, Nathan continued, in the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing the impossible. She tells me you're sadder than you need to be, and that one day you'll remember how to be happy again. The revelation that Nathan had been visited by Sarah's spirit should have alarmed Isaiah, but instead, it filled him with a strange sense of relief. Perhaps the border between life and death was not as absolute as he had believed. Perhaps love really could reach across that divide, in ways that reason could neither explain nor measure. "What does she want from me?" Isaiah asked Anna, his voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the pine needles. "She wants you to forgive yourself," Anna replied. "She wants you to let go of a blame that belongs to no one. And she wants you to remember that Nathan needs a father who can teach him how to live, not just how to survive." Isaiah slipped Sarah's ring onto his little finger, the only one where it would fit. The simple gold band felt warm against his skin, as if it carried some residual trace of the woman who had worn it with such love. For the first time since her death, he let himself remember not only the loss, but the joy that had come before it. The ancient stone tablet appeared 3 days after Isaiah's emotional breakthrough at the rock, emerging from Anna's pack with the same quiet significance that marked all her revelations. The artifact was roughly the size of a dinner plate, carved from a black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered its surface, spirals and geometric patterns that made Isaiah's eyes ache when he tried to focus on them directly. "These markings," Isaiah said, running his fingers over the carved surface. "I've seen something like them before." Anna nodded, as if she had been expecting this recognition. "You learned of them during the war, when you worked with the Crow Scouts. They showed you sacred places where the old knowledge was carved into the rock." The memory surfaced with surprising clarity. During one particularly harsh winter campaign, Isaiah's unit had been guided by Native American scouts, who possessed an almost supernatural understanding of the landscape. They had shown him ancient petroglyphs carved into cliff faces, explaining that the symbols held wisdom, passed down through countless generations. Spiritual maps, a Crow elder named Walking Bear had called them. The name, buried for over a decade, now returned to him. He said they were instructions for healing, Isaiah recalled. Healing that worked on more than just the body. "This tablet holds the same kind of knowledge," Anna explained, her small hands tracing patterns on the stone with a reverent familiarity. "It was given to me by the one who taught me how to heal, the one who found me after my wagon train froze in the mountain pass." Isaiah leaned forward, his attention sharpening. This was the first time Anna had offered any specific details about her origins beyond the basic story she'd told upon her arrival. "Tell me about this teacher." Anna's brown eyes took on a distant look, as if she were gazing back through time into another realm entirely. Her name was Singing Crow. She was old, older than anyone should be able to live. But her eyes were still bright, and her hands were still steady. "She found me 3 days after the snow stopped, when I was the only one left alive." The child's voice remained calm and matter-of-fact, as she described what must have been a traumatic memory. But Isaiah noticed the way her fingers tightened on the stone tablet. Whatever had happened during that time had marked her in ways that went deeper than physical survival. "The wagon train was taking families west, to California," Anna went on. "My parents thought we could make it through the pass before the bad weather hit. But they were wrong. The snow fell for 6 days without stopping, and the cold was like nothing I'd ever felt. One by one, the people stopped moving, stopped breathing, until it was just me, sitting in our wagon, waiting for someone to wake up. Isaiah felt his chest tighten with compassion for the terror a small child must have felt. He had seen enough death in the war to understand how deep the silence was when it replaced the voices of those you loved. Singing Crow appeared on the seventh day, Anna said, her voice taking on an almost musical quality. At first, she looked like any other crow woman, but when she touched me, I felt something flow from her hands into my body. A warmth that went beyond skin, beyond bone, down to the place where life decides whether to stay or to leave. The description reminded Isaiah of the warmth he had felt watching Anna heal Nathan. That sense of vitality flowing from her small hands into his dying son. If Anna had learned her abilities from this mysterious crow woman, it explained both her preternatural knowledge and her uncommon confidence in the face of death and suffering. She told me I had been chosen for something important, Anna continued, but that I needed to learn how to use the gift properly before I could fulfill my purpose. She took me to a high place in the mountains, where the spirit world meets the physical world, and she taught me things that most people are not meant to know. Isaiah studied the symbols on the stone tablet, trying to make sense of the intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. What kind of things? How to listen to what bodies and spirits are trying to say, Anna answered. How to see the connections between all living things. How to help people find their way back from the dark places where grief and guilt can trap them. She paused, her small fingers tracing a particularly complex spiral carved into the stone's surface. But most importantly, she taught me about the price that comes with the power to heal. She showed me that every time someone like me helps another, we take on a piece of their pain. And eventually, that collected pain has to go somewhere. The word sent a chill through Isaiah that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What do you mean? Anna looked up at him, her eyes seeming far older than her 7 years. I mean that healers can't stay in one place for too long. We help people, and then we have to move on before the darkness we absorb becomes too heavy to carry. If we stay too long, the pain we've taken from others begins to poison everything around us. The implications of her words struck Isaiah like another physical blow. He had grown so accustomed to Anna's presence, had begun to imagine a future where she would remain a permanent part of their family. Nathan had bonded with her in a way that reminded Isaiah of the boy's connection with Sarah, and the thought of losing another source of love and stability was almost unbearable. How long do you have? He asked, though a part of him didn't want to know the answer. It depends on how much healing is still needed, Anna replied. Nathan's body is well, but there are other wounds in this house that need tending. Singing Crow taught me that sometimes the deepest healing takes the longest, especially when people have been carrying their pain for many years. She set the stone tablet aside and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-dusted valley that stretched below the cabin. She also taught me that my time in the physical world is limited. I was not meant to survive the wagon train disaster, but I was given extra time to complete a specific mission. When that mission is finished, I will have to join the others who have gone on. The casual way Anna discussed her own mortality left Isaiah speechless. She spoke of death not with fear or sadness, but with the acceptance of one who understood it as a natural transition rather than an end. Her perspective was both comforting and terrifying, offering hope of some continued existence while underscoring the temporary nature of all earthly connections. What is your mission? Isaiah asked. though he suspected he already knew the answer. Anna turned from the window, her brown eyes filled with a deep compassion that seemed impossibly mature for someone her age. "To help you and Nathan heal from Sarah's death," she said simply. "To teach you both that love doesn't end when someone dies. It only changes form. And to make sure you understand that Nathan's gift is something to be nurtured, not feared." The confirmation of what Isaiah had begun to suspect brought both relief and dread. Anna's presence had already transformed their lives in miraculous ways, but knowing her time with them was finite made every moment feel precious and fragile. "There is one more thing," Anna continued, her voice taking on the serious tone she used when discussing the most important truths. "Singing Crow warned me that the authorities would eventually come looking for survivors of the wagon train. When they do, they will not understand what I am or how I survived. They will try to take me to places where my abilities will not work properly." Isaiah felt his protective instincts surge at the thought of Anna being taken away by bureaucrats who couldn't possibly comprehend the supernatural realities they had witnessed. "I won't let them take you." Anna offered a gentle, sad smile. "That is not a choice you will be able to make," she said. "But when the time comes, you will understand that letting me go is the kindest thing you can do. To fight my departure would only make everything harder for everyone." Outside the cabin, the wind rose, setting the pines to swaying, whispering secrets only Anna seemed to understand. The truth came to light on a morning when the mountain air was so clear the distant peaks seemed close enough to touch. Anna had been with them for 3 weeks, and Isaiah had begun to believe he understood the nature of her mysterious presence. Then she showed him the cord that bound spirits, and everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the borders between them shattered like ice in the spring sun. The braided cord was unlike anything Isaiah had ever seen, woven from materials that seemed to shift between plant fiber and something that might have been light itself. As Anna unwound it from her slender waist, the artifact pulsed with a soft luminescence that ached to look at directly. She held it in her cupped hands, like something both infinitely precious and infinitely dangerous. "I need to tell you something that will be hard to understand," Anna said, her young voice carrying a weight of sorrow no child should ever have to bear. "I should have told you sooner, but I wanted you and Nathan to be stronger before you knew the whole truth." Isaiah felt his stomach tighten with the same instinctive fear that had kept him alive through countless battles. Anna's tone suggested revelations that would change everything, and he had grown comfortable with the impossible balance they had achieved. "What truth?" Anna gazed down at the spirit cord in her hands, its strange light casting shifting patterns across her face. "I died in that caravan, Isaiah. My body froze along with all the others. The person you've been living with, the one you've been talking to, is not the little girl who started that journey west." The words struck Isaiah like a physical blow, though a part of him had been moving toward this understanding for days. So many things about Anna defied any normal explanation. Her preternatural knowledge, her ability to heal through methods that transcended medicine, her uncanny familiarity with aspects of their lives she should never have known. "That's impossible," he whispered. But the protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. He had witnessed too many miracles to dismiss anything as impossible. "Singing Crow found my frozen body 3 days after the storm ended," Anna continued, her matter-of-fact tone making the revelation all the more unsettling. "She could have let my spirit pass on to whatever comes next, but she saw something in the circumstances of my death that made her choose differently." Anna held up the spirit tether, its ethereal glow intensifying as she spoke. This cord tethers my spirit to the physical world. It's made of materials that exist in the space between life and death, woven with an intent and purpose most people could never comprehend. As long as I wear it, I can take a physical form and interact with the world of the living. Isaiah stared at the artifact in Anna's hands, beginning to comprehend the true magnitude of what he had witnessed. The child who had saved his son, who had brought healing and hope back into their lives, was a spirit herself, bound to the earthly plane by supernatural means, for a purpose he was only beginning to grasp. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would this singing crow bind your spirit to our world, instead of letting you find peace?" Anna's brown eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to span more than any single lifetime could hold. "Because she saw what was happening to your family. She saw Nathan's spirit beginning to follow the same path his mother had, pulled away by a grief too strong for a living child to bear. And she saw you, drowning in a guilt that was calling dark things from the spaces between worlds." The explanation struck Isaiah with the force of absolute truth. He remembered the dreams that had plagued him before Anna's arrival. Dark visions where shadowy figures seemed to whisper promises that death would be easier than the pain of living on. He had dismissed them as products of his own troubled mind, but perhaps they were something far more sinister. "Sarah's spirit was trapped," Anna continued, her small hands clutching the spirit cord as if it were a lifeline. She couldn't move on to whatever comes next, because she was trying to protect Nathan from the darkness your grief was attracting. She had been calling for help for months, but the only ones who could answer were already among the dead. The revelation reshaped everything Isaiah thought he understood about the last 3 years. Sarah's presence in his dreams, Nathan's mysterious illness, even the sense of oppressive sorrow that filled their cabin. It was all part of a supernatural struggle between forces of healing and destruction. "So, Singing Crow sent you," Isaiah said, the pieces of the puzzle that had brought Anna to his door finally clicking into place. "She gave me a choice," Anna replied. "I could pass on in peace and find the rest that awaits children who die before their time. Or I could agree to remain bound to the physical world, long enough to help your family heal the wounds that threaten to destroy you all." Isaiah felt tears burn his eyes as he began to grasp the sacrifice Anna had made. She had chosen to postpone her own eternal peace to save strangers she had never met, accepting a form of spiritual exile most people could not even comprehend. "What happens when your task is done?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Anna held up the spirit tether. Its luminous surface pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to match some cosmic heartbeat. "When the healing is complete, when Nathan is safe and you have learned to live with joy instead of guilt, this cord will dissolve. My spirit will be freed to join the others who have gone before." The words hit Isaiah with a devastating finality. He had known Anna's time with them was limited, but he had imagined departures involving distant journeys, not the complete dissolution of her existence in their world. The thought of losing her was almost as devastating as losing Sarah had been. "There's more," Anna said, her voice taking on the gentle firmness she used when delivering the hardest truths. "Sarah's spirit has been waiting for me to help her communicate with you directly. She has things she needs to tell you before she can find peace, and you have things you need to say to her before you can truly heal." The prospect of speaking directly with Sarah's spirit filled Isaiah with equal parts hope and terror. He had dreamed of this possibility during the dark months after her death, but he had also learned to fear it. What if Sarah blamed him for failing to save her? What if she was disappointed in the man he had become since she was gone? She doesn't blame you, Anna said, displaying the unnerving ability to read his thoughts that she'd shown since her arrival. She never did. The guilt you carry is something you created, not something she gave you, but she cannot rest peacefully while you destroy yourself with it. Nathan appeared in the doorway, approaching with the silent footfalls that characterized his movements through the cabin. Isaiah wondered how much of the conversation the boy had heard, and if he was ready to learn that their mysterious visitor was, in fact, a spirit bound to their world by supernatural means. I already knew, Nathan said softly, answering his father's unspoken question. Anna told me the first night she came. I wasn't scared. She felt like Mama in my dreams, sad to be gone but happy she could help us. The casual way Nathan spoke of supernatural realities reminded Isaiah of how children often accept impossible things that adults have trained themselves to reject. His son had adapted to Anna's presence not in spite of her otherworldly nature, but because of it. When will it happen? Isaiah asked Anna. When will you help me speak with Sarah? Anna looked out the window at the snow-covered valley, where the morning light was beginning to paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. Soon, she said. The healing has progressed far enough for direct communication to be possible. But you must understand that once you speak directly with Sarah's spirit, once you hear what she needs to tell you, everything will change. She paused, her small hands still holding the cord that kept her tied to their world. After that conversation, the cord will begin to weaken. My time in the physical world will begin to draw to a close. Isaiah reached out and placed a hand on Anna's shoulder, feeling the strange warmth that always radiated from her small frame. Then we'll make the most of the time we have left. Anna smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the 7-year-old child she appeared to be, rather than an ancient spirit cloaked in mortal form. Time isn't what matters, she said. What matters is that when I leave, you two will be ready to live again. The preparations began at sunset, as the mountain air grew still and the border between the physical world and the spirit realm grew as thin as morning mist. Anna had chosen this night carefully, explaining that certain alignments of the earth and sky made communication with the dead more possible for the living. Isaiah found himself caught between a desperate anticipation and a paralyzing fear as he watched Anna arrange the artifacts that would facilitate Sarah's crossing. The spirit candle was unlike anything Isaiah had ever seen. Its wax was a deep, black blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When Anna lit it with a flame from their ordinary hearth, the candle began to burn with an uncanny luminescence that cast no shadows, but filled the entire cabin with a soft, otherworldly glow. The flame danced and flickered in patterns that suggested an intelligence behind its movement, as if the fire itself were alive and aware. This candle is made from materials that exist in both worlds, Anna explained, as she positioned it in the center of their rustic wooden table. The wax comes from plants that grow only in places where spirits walk among the living. The wick is woven with fibers that hold the memory of those who have passed on. Isaiah watched the impossible flame with fascination and a growing unease. Everything about their situation defied the rational understanding of reality he had built over his 43 years of life. Yet the evidence of his senses was undeniable, and the hope of speaking with Sarah one last time overrode his discomfort with supernatural forces he could not comprehend. Nathan sat silently in a corner, his young face solemn with the understanding that momentous events were unfolding around him. The boy had accepted Anna's true nature with the adaptability of childhood. but Isaiah could see the weight of expectation in his son's eyes. Nathan had been visited by Sarah's spirit in his dreams, but this would be the first opportunity for direct, conscious communication. "Are you ready for this?" Anna asked Isaiah, her brown eyes revealing a deep compassion that seemed to span a lifetime of experience with grief and healing. Speaking with the dead is not like speaking with the living. Sarah's spirit exists in a different state now, and her perspective on earthly concerns has changed in ways that may surprise you. Isaiah nodded, though he wasn't sure he was truly ready for anything Anna was proposing. The rational part of his mind was still fighting the impossibility of what he was about to attempt, but his heart overrode those doubts with the desperate need to see Sarah again, to hear her voice, to finally say the things he had carried unspoken since her death. "What do I need to do?" he asked. Anna began arranging the other artifacts around the spirit candle, the ancient stone tablet with its enigmatic symbols, the compass that had begun to work again in her presence, even Sarah's wedding ring, which she had led him to recover from its impossible hiding place. Each object seemed to contribute its own energy to the growing supernatural atmosphere that filled the cabin. "You need to open yourself to possibilities your logical mind wants to reject," Anna said, her small hands moving with an expert precision as she created patterns that ached to be looked at directly. "Sarah's spirit has been trying to reach you for 3 years, but your guilt has been like a wall between her voice and your ability to hear it." The accusation stung because Isaiah recognized its truth. He had been so consumed by self-blame and regret that he had closed himself off to any comfort, including the possibility that Sarah might be trying to offer forgiveness from beyond the grave. His military training had taught him to rely on facts and evidence, but that same training was now an obstacle to accepting realities that transcended physical laws. "What if she blames me?" Isaiah asked, voicing the fear that had haunted him since Sarah's death. "What if she's angry that I couldn't save her?" Anna paused her preparations and looked at him with infinite patience. "Then you will finally know the truth, instead of torturing yourself with assumptions," she said. "But I have been communicating with Sarah's spirit since the night I arrived, and I can tell you that blame and anger are not what she carries." Chester McMurphy chose that moment to arrive at their door. His face was a roadmap of time, etched with the expression of a man who had witnessed something that defied his fundamental understanding of reality. The old mountaineer stepped uninvited into the cabin, his eyes immediately drawn to the unearthly illumination that filled the small space. "Sweet Mother of God," Chester whispered, his gaze fixed on the spirit candle with a mixture of awe and terror. "What in creation are you doing in here?" "We're preparing to speak with the dead," Nathan said matter-of-factly, as if such activities were a perfectly normal part of mountain life. Chester's gaze shifted from the impossible flame to Hannah, and Isaiah saw recognition dawn in the old man's eyes. "You ain't what you appear to be, are you, child?" "No," Hannah replied simply. "I am a spirit who chose to remain bound to the physical world long enough to help this family heal the wounds that threatened to destroy it." The blunt admission should have sent Chester fleeing into the night. Instead, the old mountaineer settled into one of the chairs with the quiet acceptance of a man who had lived long enough to know the world held more mysteries than any one person could ever comprehend. "I figured as much," Chester said, his voice as steady as when he discussed practical matters like the weather or wildlife. "Too many impossible things been happening around here since you showed up. Besides, I asked around town again. Still ain't no record of any wagon train coming through these parts. You all just appeared out of thin air, far as anyone knows." Hannah nodded, seemingly unsurprised by either Chester's presence or his acceptance of supernatural realities. "You are welcome to stay and witness what will happen tonight," she said. "Sometimes it helps to have someone present who can remember what they saw, in case others doubt it ever truly happened." The spirit candle's flame suddenly flared brighter, casting dancing patterns on the cabin walls that seemed to move independently of the fire that created them. Isaiah felt the temperature in the room subtly shift, not growing colder, but taking on a quality that made the air feel different against his skin. "She is coming," Hannah said softly, her young voice taking on the reverent tone of one announcing the arrival of royalty. "Sarah's spirit is gathering the strength to manifest in a way that will allow for direct communication." Isaiah's heart began to pound, with an intensity that reminded him of the moments before a cavalry charge during the war. All his instincts screamed at him to brace for something that would test his courage and resolve in a way physical danger never could. Speaking to the dead required a different kind of courage than facing enemy bullets. It demanded a willingness to confront truths about himself that he had been avoiding for 3 long years. Nathan moved closer to his father, not out of fear, but from an understanding that family unity would be important during what was about to unfold. The boy's presence provided Isaiah an anchor to the world of the living, a reminder that whatever happened in the next hour, his responsibilities to his son would remain. "Remember," Hannah said, her hands hovering over the spirit candle as its flame began to take on shapes that suggested more than random combustion. "Sarah exists in a different state now. She sees her life from a perspective that encompasses both her earthly struggles and their spiritual meaning. Do not expect her to be exactly the woman you remember." The flames suddenly elongated, stretching upward until they formed a column of light that reached nearly to the cabin's ceiling. Within that luminous pillar, shapes began to coalesce, shadows and suggestions of human features that gradually grew more distinct, more recognizable. "Isaiah," a familiar voice whispered from within the light, and Isaiah's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the soft tones that had comforted him through years of marriage and shared dreams. Sarah's spirit began to take visible form within the pillar of supernatural flame, her features becoming clear enough for him to see the beloved face that had haunted his dreams since her death. She appeared just as he remembered her, yet somehow more luminous, more at peace, as if death had refined away everything but her essential goodness. "My beloved," Sarah's spirit said, her voice bridging the space between worlds with crystalline clarity. "I have waited so long to speak with you directly." Isaiah tried to respond, but his voice froze in the face of the overwhelming reality thus of seeing his wife again. 3 years of accumulated grief, guilt, and longing crashed down on him like an avalanche, leaving him speechless before the miracle he had dreamed of, but never believed possible. "Pa," Nathan whispered, reaching out to squeeze his father's hand. "Is it really her? Is that really Mama?" Sarah's spirit turned to her son, a smile radiating maternal love across the boundary between life and death. "Hello, my sweet boy. You've grown so much, and you have been so brave taking care of your father." The casual way Sarah's spirit acknowledged her son's growth suggested that death had not severed her connection to her family. She had been watching over them, even when they could not feel her presence. "Sarah," Isaiah finally managed to whisper, his voice thick with 3 years of unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I should have saved you. I should have done more, tried harder." "Stop," Sarah's spirit interrupted, her voice carrying a gentle firmness Isaiah remembered from their life together. We need to talk about the guilt you have been carrying, because it is not yours to bear, and it has been poisoning everything good that is left in your life. As Sarah's spirit spoke, the healing circle of stones materialized around the cabin. Each stone appeared with a soft pulse of luminescence that seemed to echo the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. Isaiah watched in astonishment as the supernatural boundary formed, creating a sacred space where the laws of the physical world bent to accommodate communication between the living and the dead. The guilt you carry is not justified by the truth, Sarah's spirit continued, her voice cutting through the luminous barrier between worlds with perfect clarity. My death was determined by forces greater than any earthly medicine could address. No amount of determination or love could have changed what was fated to happen. Isaiah felt his carefully constructed defenses crumble under the gentle assault of Sarah's words. For 3 years, he had built his identity around the belief that he had failed as a husband and a protector. The possibility that her death had been beyond his control challenged the foundations of everything he had told himself about responsibility and failure. But I should have found better doctors, he protested, his voice cracking under the weight of accumulated self-blame. I should have taken you to Denver or back east, where there are real hospitals. I should have. You were meant to do nothing more than what you did. Sarah's spirit cut in, her luminous form moving closer to the edge of the healing circle. You held my hand when I was afraid. You brought me water when the fever left me parched. You read to me when I couldn't sleep. You loved me completely, until the moment I stopped breathing. The words struck Isaiah with devastating accuracy because they described exactly what he had done during Sarah's final days. He had provided comfort, care, and unwavering devotion, even as he watched helplessly while the illness consumed the woman he loved. Yet somehow, he had convinced himself that love and presence were not enough, that he should have been able to perform miracles through sheer force of will. Hannah knelt beside the healing circle, her small hands pressed against one of the glowing stones, as if drawing strength from its otherworldly energy. Tell him what you have been trying to show him in his dreams, she urged Sarah's spirit. Tell him what you need him to understand. Sarah's spirit turned its full attention back to Isaiah, and he felt the weight of her gaze across the boundary between life and death. Her eyes held the same gentle wisdom they had in life, but now that wisdom was reinforced by perspectives only the dead could possess. I need you to understand that your guilt has been keeping me tethered here, Sarah said, her voice taking on an urgent tone that made Isaiah's chest tighten with a new kind of fear. My spirit cannot find peace while you are drowning in self-blame. Every day that you punish yourself for failing to save me, you forge chains that bind me to this realm. The revelation hit Isaiah like a physical blow. He had thought his grief was a private affair, something that affected only him and Nathan. The possibility that his self-destructive guilt was actually preventing Sarah's spirit from finding eternal rest added a new dimension of horror to his emotional suffering. I didn't know, he whispered, understanding for the first time that his pain could have consequences beyond his own sorrow. I never meant to hurt you. You are not hurting me, Sarah's spirit clarified, her voice softening with infinite compassion. You are hurting yourself, and that pain is drawing dark things from the spaces between worlds. These entities feed on guilt and sorrow, and they have been growing stronger around our family because of the feast you have provided them. Chester shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his weathered face pale with the realization that supernatural forces had been operating in the valley without his knowledge. Dark things? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Hannah answered without taking her hands from the stones of the healing circle. Spirits that exist in the void between life and death, she explained. They are drawn to places where grief has turned poisonous, where people refuse to let go of pain that serves no purpose. They whisper suggestions of how death might be easier than healing. Isaiah remembered the dark dreams that had plagued him before Hannah's arrival, the shadowy figures that seemed to promise relief from his suffering if he would only stop fighting to live. He had dismissed them as products of his own troubled mind, but now he understood they were something far more sinister. That is why Nathan became ill, Sarah's spirit continued, her luminous form flickering slightly as emotion affected her ability to maintain a physical manifestation. He was trying to absorb some of your pain to protect you, but these dark entities saw an opportunity to claim a young soul. His fever was not just an illness, it was a spiritual battle for his life. Nathan moved closer to his father, his small hand sliding into Isaiah's larger one with the instinctual comfort children offer in moments of adult distress. "The shadows used to whisper to me when I was sick," the boy said quietly. "They told me it would be easier to follow Mama than to stay here and watch Pa hurt so much." The matter-of-fact way Nathan described the supernatural temptation toward death sent a chill through Isaiah. His son had been fighting for his life on levels that transcended physical illness, battling entities that fed on their family's tragedy and sought to claim another victim for their shadowy purposes. "That is when I sent out the call for help," Sarah's spirit said, her voice taking on the tone of someone confessing a desperate act. "I couldn't protect Nathan on my own, and I couldn't reach you through the wall of guilt you'd built around your heart. I needed someone who existed in both worlds, someone who could heal the living while communicating with the dead." Isaiah looked at Hannah, understanding for the first time the full magnitude of the sacrifice she had made. The child's spirit had answered Sarah's plea for help, agreeing to bind herself to the physical world to save a family she had never known from the supernatural forces that threatened to destroy them all. The bridge of light began to form as Sarah's spirit spoke her final words to Isaiah. It was a luminous path that stretched from their cabin into realms beyond mortal comprehension, an artifact made of pure spiritual energy, visible as ribbons of silver and gold that wove themselves into a causeway across the void between life and death. Isaiah watched in awe as the impossible structure solidified, creating a passage that seemed to lead toward infinite peace. "I have to go now," Sarah's spirit said, her voice carrying the gentle finality of one who has completed a long and difficult task. "My time in this realm is ending, and I can feel the pull of whatever comes next. But before I cross, I need you to promise me something." Isaiah felt his heart break all over again, realizing their reunion was about to end as suddenly as it had begun. 3 years of desperate longing had led to this single conversation, and now even this brief gift was slipping away like water through his fingers. "Anything," he whispered, his voice choked with tears he no longer tried to hold back. "I'll promise anything." Sarah's spirit moved to the very edge of the healing circle, her luminous form more radiant than ever as she prepared for her final journey. "Promise me you will live fully again," she said. "Promise me you will teach Nathan to use his gift to help others, instead of hiding from it in fear. And promise me you will remember that love does not end with death. It only changes form." The words struck Isaiah with the force of absolute truth, reshaping his understanding of loss and healing in ways that would echo for the rest of his life. For 3 years, He had believed that love died with the one you loved. But Sarah's continued presence, her unwavering concern, was proof that the deepest connections transcended physical existence. "I promise," he said, the vow resonating from the depths of his being. "I will stop punishing myself for not being able to save you. And I will help Nathan understand that his abilities are a gift, not a burden." Anna's form began to fade as the cord that tethered her spirit at the waist started to dissolve. Her supernatural substance unraveled like morning mist touched by sunlight. Her mission was nearly complete, and the artifact that had bound her to the physical world was responding to the spiritual resolution taking place within the healing circle. "Anna's time is also nearly over," Sarah's spirit said, turning to the child's spirit with infinite gratitude. "She chose to delay her own eternal rest to save our family. When I cross over, the cord that binds her to this world will completely dissolve, and she will be free to join the other spirits who have finished their earthly work." Isaiah looked at Anna, truly seeing her for the first time. The small girl who had saved Nathan's life, who had brought healing and hope back into their home, was a spirit who had sacrificed her own peace for the well-being of strangers. The sheer magnitude of her gift left him speechless, humbled, and overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," he said to Anna, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "Thank you for everything you've given us." Anna smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the 7-year-old she appeared to be, rather than the ancient spirit she truly was. "It was my choice," she said simply, "and it was worth it to see you remember how to hope again." Nathan stepped forward, his young face serious with the understanding that he was witnessing events that would shape the rest of his life. "Will I ever see you both again?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Sarah's spirit knelt, bringing herself to Nathan's eye level despite the supernatural barrier between them. "Someday, when your earthly work is done, we will all be together again," she promised. "But that is a long, long time from now, and you have many important things to do before then." The bridge of light pulsed with a growing brilliance, and Isaiah could feel the pull it exerted on the two spirits. They were being called to the realm that awaited them, their time in the world of the living, now measured in moments. "I love you both," Sarah's spirit told him, her voice beginning to echo, as if spoken from a great distance. "Live well, love deeply, and remember that I am never truly gone. I only change into something you cannot see with your physical eyes." Anna moved toward the bridge of light, her form growing more translucent with each step. The tethering cord had almost completely dissolved, leaving only wisps of luminous energy that dissipated as Isaiah watched. "Take care of each other," Anna said, her young voice carrying the wisdom of lifetimes. "And remember that some gifts are meant to be shared with the world, not hidden away in fear." Sarah's spirit stepped onto the bridge of light first, her form growing more radiant as she moved toward eternal peace. Anna followed, and together, they began their journey along the glowing path that led beyond the confines of mortal existence. Isaiah and Nathan stood together in their cabin, watching as the two spirits who had shaped their destiny walked toward realms beyond physical comprehension. The healing circle began to fade, its glowing stones dissolving back into the dimension that had produced them, and the supernatural atmosphere that had filled their home gradually returned to normal. But nothing would ever be truly normal again. They had witnessed miracles that proved love transcends death, and that hope can triumph over even the deepest despair. Spring came early that year, as if the mountain itself were responding to the spiritual healing that had occurred within their cabin. The snow melted into great singing streams that rushed down the mountainsides, and wildflowers bloomed in riotous abundance throughout the valley. Isaiah found himself emerging from the isolation that had defined his life since Sarah's death, his heart finally opening to possibilities beyond mere survival. The new compass Chester had given him did not point north. Instead, its needle consistently indicated the direction of hope and new beginnings, a tangible reminder that some journeys required spiritual guidance, not geographical. Isaiah kept it on the mantelpiece, right beside his father's restored compass, two artifacts representing the past he honored and the future he was finally ready to embrace. Nathan flourished in the months that followed. His inherited sensitivity developed into a remarkable ability to sense the needs of both people and animals. The boy could predict storms hours before they arrived, locate lost cattle by feeling their distress, and identify blights in crops before any visible symptoms appeared. Most importantly, he approached his gifts with the joy and confidence Anna had taught him, rather than the fear that might have paralyzed him. "Pa, the Hendersons' baby is going to be born tonight," Nathan announced one late summer evening, his matter-of-fact tone carrying an authority that came from being consistently right. "Mrs. Henderson is scared because it's coming early, but the baby is going to be healthy." Isaiah looked up from the journal where he was recording Anna's teachings. The leather-bound book had become his most prized possession, a record of knowledge he planned to share. "How do you know?" he asked, though he no longer questioned his son's insights. "I can feel her worrying from here," Nathan replied, pointing toward the Henderson homestead 5 miles away. "It's like a light that's flickering instead of shining steady. But underneath the worry, there's something strong and happy. That's the baby, getting ready to meet the world." Isaiah closed his journal and reached for his coat. "Then we'd best get over there," he said. "Mrs. Henderson will need help, and you can reassure her that everything is going to be all right." The two had become the mountain community's unofficial healers, combining Nathan's supernatural sensitivity with Isaiah's growing knowledge of Anna's remedies. Word of their unusual abilities spread slowly but steadily, and people began to make the difficult journey to their remote valley, seeking help for ailments that conventional medicine could not treat. Isaiah had initially worried about exposing Nathan to the fear of neighbors who might not understand, but the boy met each challenge with the quiet confidence Anna had instilled in him, treating his abilities as natural extensions of compassion, not as burdens to be hidden.